Hello and welcome to Well Played. I am your host Bluetongue from around Sydney, Australia. I am also joined by our hosts. From the hills we have Harrow. How are you doing, Harrow?
Really well. I just got my last two Dinobots delivered today. Now I've completed the whole set.
Excellent. Does it give you an achievement?
Yes, it's called You're Going to Die Alone.
Oh. It's the sad and lonely achievement. Poor Harrow. Oh dear. I'm sure the appropriate person is out there for you somewhere, Harrow. All right. Also joining us from Canberra, we have Crystal. How are you doing, Crystal?
Pretty good. Obviously not as well as Harrow on those Dinobots and dying alone, but I'm looking forward to my holiday next week. I'm going to Southeast Asia.
That's exciting. Are you going anywhere specifically?
Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam.
Awesome.
Yep.
Is there some focus that you have to that holiday, or is it just a general experience-based holiday?
It's general experience, but the whole reason we're going to Singapore and Malaysia is specifically to visit Legoland.
Ah,
yeah.
Sounds awesome.
Excellent choice.
I checked out the massive Lego shop just near Disneyland when I was over in Anaheim.
Yeah.
And I do regret somewhat not buying more stuff when I was there. I did retrospectively get a Lego Black Pearl though, which is totally awesome.
The only problem is with Lego in its giant boxes, you'll either have to ship it home or carry it with you for the entire trip, which is not going to work very well. So we'll see how it goes.
That is true. I think you can probably break it down into smaller chunks. That's what I did with my stuff. Like that's the whole idea with Lego, isn't it?
If only it disassembled something.
But yeah, like I sort of carefully segregated all the sections that I needed for the whole thing, and then broke them into different parts that you would open in order, and then just stored them like that in a big tackle box.
Right.
Yeah.
Duly noted.
All you need to do is just buy a tackle box. Wait, no, okay. So from Gladesville we have Bauxite. How you doing, Box?
I'm doing really well. I've had a good week at work, and I've been playing a lot of Diablo 3 in my spare time. So I've got up to Paragon level 435 or something like that this season, which is really good. And I've got most of the gear pieces that I need to build out my set. So I've been playing a Demon Hunter and really enjoying that. So
awesome.
Yeah, I've had a really good time. How about you, Bluetongue? How you going?
I'm only about Paragon level 320 something. Yeah, 435. Wow, you really pulled ahead in the last couple of days. I was playing with our friend Mike last night, and he was doing Greater Rift level 68, I think, solo. And when he grouped up with us, he had to drop back all the way to 62. So that was a little bit of a, bringing me down to earth kind of feeling.
Yeah, Mike has a lot more spare time than you and I do, though. So
yeah, I wish I had spare time. But instead, I get to do this podcast. So, let's get stuck in.
So today, our first topic is Codenames. Codenames is a board game that sees two rival spy masters competing to recover their own secret agents before finding the assassin or the opponent's spies. Designer Vlada Chavatal, everyone struggles with that name, he's created a really good play experience that you can share with friends and family alike. Codenames is great no matter what your group size, so anywhere between 6 and 8 people I find is the best number. Anyway, to play, you have a small grid of 5x5 with individual single-word cards laid out, and they represent the globe and where all the potential spies are located. The game group is split into 2 teams. One person from each team is given the spy master role. They give their team clues to find where on the board their team of spies are. The spy master is allowed one word as a clue, and then it is to be followed by a number which indicates how many clues on the board match that clue that was given. But it's not so easy for the rest of the guessing team. Should they guess the wrong word, they risk finding the assassin or the opponent's spies. Finding the assassin immediately ends the game. So, for example, we were playing the other day, and actually one of my teammates, who was the spy master, gave a brilliant clue. Wiggles, 2. We were able to successfully guess pirate and dinosaur, because,
Captain Feathersword and Dorothy.
There we go. No, you know better than I do.
All over it.
Yeah. So, the fun I find in this game is the way that your team interprets the clue. So, for example, someone could say cheese, and one team member might go straight for types of cheese, like tasty, mozzarella, parmesan, but the other person might go immediately to thinking about the cheese-making process and guess mold or preservation. And it really depends on what's on the board. So, how have you guys found this game?
I'll start. I actually really enjoyed it, which is surprising because I'm not a subjective game sort of person. I hate Dixit with a passion. I don't like apples to apples or Cards Against Humanity, but Codenames is a subjective game that I actually really like.
What about you, Bauxite? How did you find it?
I really enjoyed it. It sort of fills the word game void that I had. Taboo was quite a good game, but I have a lot of friends who don't, they're quite polite. So they don't like jumping in and interrupting people or just shouting, words at someone, and that's a very, very fast-paced game. So that didn't really suit people. Apples to Apples, we've played to death, and Cards Against Humanity, well, it's basically apples to apples. So we don't really play that very much either. So I've played it maybe 20 or 30 times now. I've really enjoyed it.
So anyway, I really enjoyed Codenames, and it does, like Bork said, fill that word game slot within my collection. The thing I like about this is that it's a bit more flexible. Apples to Apples and Cards Against Humanity are very similar. Unfortunately, I played Cards Against Humanity before I tried Apples to Apples, so I found Apples to Apples very boring. But Cards Against Humanity, you really have to pick your audience. It's not a card game I can play with my cousins. It's not a game I can play with my mum or that I want to play with my mum. Whereas Codenames is great for any audience. And even kids can probably get in on the action without feeling like they're at a significant disadvantage.
So I've played this game once, and during the actual playing of it, I really enjoyed the fact that this was a game based on your diction and your ability to connect words mentally. So that's like a creative way, and it's a creative premise for a game. I guess it would be leaning a lot more towards games like, I don't know, Pictionary or something like that, from that creative ilk. However, there is no creative side to it aside from simply trying to connect what clues you are given and hoping that the person thinks the same thing you do. So one example that I would give is that during my playthrough, I was given the words soldier and invasion, I think, were two of the words, and thinking myself to be a complete genius and going, yep, that's perfect. I said Overlord 2. Thinking, surely they'll get this. Everyone else knows their World War II history as much as I do. This will be like a breeze. No, it was not. It did not go well. Yeah, but it was still a fun experience to watch everyone sort of flounder over and then trying not to react. See, that's I guess one kind of difficulty to this game is deliberately trying to force yourself not to react to someone making the complete wrong decision.
Well, arguably, I was in this game. Arguably, the wrong decision was giving the clue Overlord.
I need a third opinion. Has everyone else heard of Operation Overlord? Anyone?
Oh, no, I absolutely know what Operation Overlord is, and I knew at the time. It just, if you had said Operation Overlord, yes, I instantly would have got those two, but you're only allowed one word. And because you said Overlord, I actually went straight to the literal meaning of the word Overlord, which is like dictator, king, ruler, that sort of thing, rather than the code name for an operation in World War II.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't a terrible clue. It was an abysmal clue. So
Right.
it was fine. It was just not exactly on the same wavelength that and perhaps if I'd given you that clue, you would have instantly got it.
Yeah.
But I'm not as I guess obsessive about World War II as you are.
So, for someone who already has games like Apples to Apples and Cards Against Humanity in their collection, do you think that this fills that same space, or do you think it fits somewhere else in your collection? Crystal.
I own Cards Against Humanity, and I quite happily have Codenames alongside of it because, as I said before, Cards Against Humanity has a very restricted audience, whereas Codenames I can happily crack out at a family get-together, at work, or just with my friends.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the Cards Against Humanity, for those people who haven't played it, it's basically deliberately almost trying to offend people. There's a lot of highly offensive stuff in it, and if you choose to be really crude or really offensive, then that is a game. That game is your perfect vehicle to do that. So you need to play it with a bunch of people with thick skin, and you need to play it with a bunch of people who are going to get your jokes. So that's the kind of people that would need that, whereas this is a much more PG-based kind of audience.
So having said that, in the 3 games I've played, twice I've sort of had to resort to, I suppose you could call it racism, because you've got to say a general term or a stereo, because you've only got one word, so you sort of have to rely on a stereotype or a generalization to cover 2 bases. So, yeah, it's nowhere near as bad as Cards Against Humanity, but I do think you're going to run the risk, you're still going to run that risk playing this game.
Yeah.
I think you're always going to run the risk, but it really depends on your audience and the way they think. Like playing with my younger cousins or my aunt, for example, they're just simply not going to even think about that type of clue. Whereas with Cards Against Humanity, there is no way you can possibly play that game without being offensive, rude, etc., so forth.
One example we had in one of our games was the clue frog. Now, the 2 words on the table were, what was it, pond and French. So that I got that immediately. I believe it was you, Harrow, that gave that clue, was it? Or were you in that game?
To be coming from me, sorry. But anyway.
It might have been Brendan, our good friend Brendan. In any case, that wasn't particularly offensive, and I don't think you would have said something really horrific like a racial slur in order to connect those 2 words. Perhaps some French people feel that frog is a racial slur against them, and if so, I apologise on behalf of the podcast and our good friend Brendan.
It's a fairly mild racial slur, at least. Especially as far as such things go.
I think most people feel that it is a mild racial slur, except when it's against them, so yeah.
Okay. This game reminds me of a game called Balderdash, where essentially you're given a word, and and you each have to make up a definition for that word, and then that gets mixed in with the real definition. People have to try and guess which is the correct one. You get points for tricking other people into guessing your definition, and you also get points for picking the correct one. So it feels along those lines in that it's a test of your vocabulary and it's a test of your ability to get into other people's heads.
It's definitely got some similar elements in that you've really got to be on your team's wavelength, because there's plenty of times you'll give a clue and the rest of your team have absolutely no clue what you're on about, which is part of the fun, to be honest, because you kind of get to learn a lot about a person based on what they guess.
Yeah. So far we've talked about Balderdash, we've talked about Cards Against Humanity, we've talked about Apples to Apples. Are there any other games you think would fit loosely into this style of game?
Dixit.
Dixit? Okay, I've not actually played that, but...
Yep, avoid it.
Cool.
It's not to Harrow's taste, but there is absolutely nothing wrong with the game.
I
It's a perfectly good game.
Yeah, I don't mind Dixit, and it depends on the audience you play with. There are some people that I just don't fit on their wavelength, so in those kind of games I struggle. But your close group of friends where you have shared experiences often works a bit better. So there's this game called Categories where you're basically given a list of topics and there's a letter and you have to think of a word relating to the topics based on the letter you're given, which actually my partner's parents really love, and haven't seen them again yet since I've had Codenames, but I'm really keen to try Codenames with them because I think they'll be totally into it.
Yeah.
I think it could feel so it's a bit more interactive than Categories, especially player-to-player interaction. So hoping that one's a hit there.
To go even more mainstream than that, I'd be thinking about like a TV show like Family Feud, where people are given a subject and everyone else has to think up a word that's associated with that subject, and the members of the team have to try and reproduce those words in, well, it doesn't really matter which order, they just have to pick them out. So it's sort of similar along those lines in that if you're given the subject, you're going to have to try and pick out the words that you're given as well. So it's partly that, it's partly a creative game when you're sort of in the agents thing, or was it like a team leader role?
Spy Master.
That would be a very sensible thing for a game called Codenames. Yeah. So there's a lot of examples of other stuff that would mean that you're probably inclined to this type of game. I can recommend it from someone who doesn't particularly like a lot of that stuff that we've just been talking about. It feels a lot more down my alley in terms of diction and vocabulary and that sort of exercise mentally.
Yeah, I'll echo that, Bluetongue. If you're not into subjective games, don't worry. I'd still give this one. I'd still have a go at this one.
Yeah. I find games like Cards Against Humanity really frustrating because the actual game itself doesn't really have any quantitative way to measure how good your responses are, aside from the person who happens to be the one picking the responses that time. Cool.
So Codenames is published by a variety of different publishers. In this country, ELO or CGE, which stands for Czech Games Edition, are the main publishers. You can pick it up for about $25 to $35 depending on who you buy it from. It's a relatively simple game, just 400 cards plus another 50 other cards, so that's 450 cards. So it's really not that complex and doesn't have many components, so you shouldn't have to pay too much for it. Gets about 8 out of 10 on Board Game Geek, so I would definitely rate this as a must-buy for most collections, especially if you don't have any other word-based games in your collection.
That's true. The actual game itself is massively popular at the moment. I saw many copies when we were down in CanCon the other week, so it shouldn't be that difficult to actually find, even by Australian standards.
Yeah, there was a real shortage over Christmas and early January, but it looks like they've done a second printing, so there are a lot of copies out at the moment.
Yeah. So yeah, feel free to pick it up. It's good quality. For our next subject this episode, we're going to be talking about a novel by the name of Ready Player One, which was published in 2011 by Random House as the first novel by Ernest Cline, who has since published a vast quantity of work of one other book titled Armada. So Ready Player One is set in the future in 2044 in what actually amounts to a post-apocalyptic wasteland. However, we're not going down the standard path of like zombie apocalypse and vampires or undead in some description. We're instead going into the world of virtual reality. And in this story, a gamer by the name of Wade Watts is attempting to uncover a mystery implanted in this vast virtual world by its creator. Now, the mystery itself essentially becomes a culture, and it becomes a microcosm of the 80s TV and a very initial computer gaming world. So games like Digger and Joust and any number of other games are referenced in this book. And I'm really enjoying it. It's a really easy book to consume, and I am pretty sure most of our other hosts are probably going to agree with me. So let's start with you, Crystal. How did you find it?
I really, really enjoyed it. I liked a lot of the 80s pop culture references. Now, I was born in the 80s, so I didn't actually experience the 80s quite like I'm guessing Ernest Cline did. But it was thoroughly enjoyable, especially just those knockbacks to 80s music, because I am a fan of 80s music, and let's face it, who isn't?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned being born in the 80s. I was born in the 80s too, probably a couple of years earlier than you. But I really did find that there were a lot of references that I had very little idea about. Like, I've never even heard of Joust, but I've played new versions of it in, the remakes in games like WoW and that sort of thing. So that was really kind of cool to sort of get a bit more perspective on where that came from. But yeah, there were a lot of 80s that really hit home with me. Back to the Future references, War Games, that sort of thing, Lady Hawk. Those were huge references for me. I'm like, yeah, this is amazing. But other things just completely flew over my head. So I'm wondering how many references I would get if the author had been, say, 10 or 20 years younger, and what the book would look like if it was made by someone a bit more my age. But even saying that, it was an excellent book. I really had a real blast. I had listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Will Wheaton, and he did a fantastic job. There was one thing that really tended to annoy me, which I won't talk about because I'm not going to be negative. Someone else can jump in instead of me talking. Yeah.
All right. So all my recollections of the 80s, I'm going to go over them quickly now, is big hair, corduroys, and preschool. That's how young I was during the 80s. So during that time, I didn't have the same experience as a lot of these guys did. Stuff like Atari and that sort of very beginnings of the gaming console and the gaming culture is basically beyond me. I jumped in later than that, and like some of my very first games were things like Tetris and Sopwith and like Mario Brothers on the original Nintendo console. So I did appreciate some of the references, and I've got a fairly comprehensive knowledge of gaming, but nowhere near as what is actually contained in this novel. What about you, Harrow? How did you find it and the references? Did they feel relatable to you?
No, the references weren't that, well, most of the references weren't that relatable to me, but I think the author did a pretty decent job of explaining how these old school games work. I mean, I know how a pen and paper RPG works. I know how a side scroller works. I know what would you call Joust? I don't know
Arcade game. It's just an old school arcade game.
I know how all these work. So when it goes, this is an arcade game called Joust, and this is the rules. I had no problem visualizing it in my mind, and then I just got that this was just another 80s reference. I mean, would I have liked to have seen more references to Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Inspector Gadget, the stuff I grew up on? Sure. But no, but this was fine.
Yeah. So this is almost like the generation before us. This is the people that really sort of did the trailblazing and the old school of computer programming and making the games yourself, like the text-based adventure games, that sort of thing. See, I always had a visual component to my adventure games like Police Quest and King's Quest and stuff like that, but the kind of stuff they talk about in this includes like the pure text-based ones where your interactions are all just typed in a computer and you're hoping for a certain result or something like that.
Not dying.
Yeah.
So to give a bit more of a feel about how the book is structured, it's a lot like, in some ways, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory meets The Matrix or Tron. So there's the whole virtual reality thing, but also Wade is, and everyone else in the world, is feverishly hunting through the computer simulation, which is called the Oasis, looking for the Easter egg which the game's creator had put in there, because that'll lead them to having all the money and stuff. So in terms of getting this Easter egg, Wade and his friends are digging and sorting and sifting through all of the game's creators' favorite 80s things, which is how they always come in. So Ernest Cline will be talking in great detail about Ladyhawke and the specific director and the source material and the screenwriter. There'll be some obscure little clue that Wade will have to pick up on in order to solve his next puzzle. So he'll be faced with challenges like completely narrating a whole film's script from memory in order to demonstrate to the game that he has a fundamental and completely all-encompassing understanding and memorization of the 80s. So that and that's the whole point. The game's designer was obsessed with this, with the culture of the 80s. So when he designed his Easter egg in the game in order to inherit all of the fortune of his company, he wanted it to go to someone who appreciated and understood the same things that he loved.
Yeah, I can really appreciate this book from a rather ironic standpoint in that the whole purpose of what we're doing right now, is to share things that we love with the audience. So in exactly that same way, the creator of this Easter egg has basically given purpose to everyone to share like his love of 80s games and culture and role playing and everything with basically the entire world. It gives them incentive to go and look at these things, and everyone gets really, really hooked on it, and they really start enjoying all these really obscure shows and animations and games that he loves and grew up with. So yeah, I really appreciate the book from that perspective. It's a really meta novel for us to be covering in the podcast.
Yeah, in some ways. And it does feel like, particularly to me, that it's Ernest Cline's love letter to pop culture from the 80s. So he's really shown how much he loves that material, which, I can appreciate. And it really shines through the book.
So what did you guys like most about this book? What is there a particular part that really resonated with you or that you really enjoyed? Or is it just the whole ride as something that you appreciated?
I liked this whole, the adventure, this would you call it Hero's Journey? Yeah, Hero's Journey. This adventure of this one guy against the world wanting to solve the riddle. And I actually really liked the way the sixes were described. It's like, yep, these are corporate nerds. These are bad nerds. You don't want them getting control of your leisure activities. So I really like the way that IOI was written and described.
Yeah. One thing that really sunk that home for me is the existence of Wikipedia. And what would happen if a big corporation got their hands on Wikipedia and what they would do with it. And it just made me realize that it would then be smattered with advertising and all sorts of unpleasantness, which it's so useful as a tool that it would render it unappealing to like the vast majority of people who use it. And it gives me a renewed enthusiasm for the sort of autonomy of various parts of the internet.
Yeah, I mean, it is a real celebration of open source and free material.
Do you think the author was meaning to get in on the whole piracy, open source, creative freedom debate because essentially Halliday's pirated all this stuff to make his riddles and to make something new for the users and for the challengers?
The main character in it is almost like a natural born pirate. He just goes and grabs whatever he needs in the most illegal way possible.
Well, I'm not so sure it's piracy because, remember, it's set in 2045 and copyright laws, especially perhaps in America, are very different to here in Australia, for one. And in 2045, there may be some statute of limitations that have worn out by that time.
No, they got their claws on that. A lot of their IPs will last forever, unfortunately.
No, it's only 100 years. And it's not forever and ever. But
doesn't he access it through his school library?
Yeah, I would say
some of it, but there's also programs that he uses. For example, when he's scanning his planet for the place he's looking for, he uses software that he's pirated to do that.
Back to Harrow's main point, it's not outside the realm of possibility that Halliday has actually purchased all of this material and put it into the game. And from a legal standpoint, you could almost argue that it's a transformative work of art by putting it into real space and taking a 2D film and making it a 3D experience. That's a bit of a long bow, but considering he is literally a squillionaire, he can probably afford to purchase it.
Yeah. That's very valid. I agree. So, were there parts of this book that felt laboured or didn't actually resonate with you at all?
Something that didn't resonate with me was just his whole pining for the online, pining for Artemis online. And like, seriously, dude, get outside. Go learn what it feels like to hold a girl. I did not like that.
But outside in this world is very different to how we experience outside. And by the sounds of, like, once he's made the move after school, that the outside really isn't an option for him. And even if it was, I don't know how much community there would be happening in the real world, because it seems like the Oasis is pretty much what everyone does.
Yeah, at the beginning of the book, Wade describes how he created a video game, which sort of represents how his life is in the stacks, the poverty community in which he grows up. And he describes, going to school as, avoiding pedophiles and junkies and drug dealers and completely people who want to rob him and do bad things.
Yeah. Kidnapping and steal my organs.
Yeah.
I'm really attached to my organs.
Right. So he doesn't really have a great opportunity to go out and meet girls who don't want to steal his organs. So, in not any of the good ways.
Okay, but after the move to Colorado, and he's pining for it. He had a nerd crush when he was still in the stacks, but he's not really pining for her until he's in Colorado, which is safer. He could have gone outside at that point.
He could have, but it was too dangerous, and he had things he had to do. I'm going to say outside is a bad plan.
Also, the character's an introvert.
Excellent point.
Except in the Oasis.
In the Oasis, also true. He's still, I think, more of an introvert than an extrovert.
No.
Until he discovers the first key.
Right up until that point, he only has one friend.
That's true. But he also he feels like only one person that he sort of is his intellectual match by the sounds of it. And
so he's a narcissist.
But the one thing that I want to illustrate is the argument that he has with that friend in front of a whole bunch of people. That is not an introverted activity. That is something that someone who is extroverted would do.
Is this in the beginning?
Yeah. This is before he's found the key and stuff.
I think that particular argument is a playful argument done in a safe space with people he knows. So there are the kind of introverts that kind of are the baseline, don't interact, don't talk to people. But then there's the kind of the next level of introvert where once they're in their comfort zone, they become a little more extroverted, which I think he has that relationship with age. So can indulge in that behavior and feel safe.
So there's one thing in this novel that I keep seeing popping up in so many different series, particularly fantasy-based stuff. So David Eddings, Raymond Feist, you name it. And it's the whole rags to riches scenario. And it seems to write really well. It seems to really pull the reader along in the story. What did you guys think about that? Do you think that is like a deliberate choice, or is it just something that the author thought sort of fit in his environment?
What Bauxite was saying earlier, he's got to deal with the organ thieves and the pedophiles and the robbers and the murderers. And so he's now overcome those. So the author doesn't want to just tell the story of him having to deal with that the entire time, but the only way he's going to overcome these ones is by going up a social rank, I suppose you could call it, going up a class, raising himself into a new class. So yeah, the rags to riches is a very common trope in all heroes' journey stories.
Yeah, and it even fits more so in this book in that
internet celebrity, internet fame can come in a flash, yes.
Yeah.
Internet fortune as well.
Yeah.
Something I thought the book did a really good job was it balanced the pros and cons of having something like the Oasis. Having the Oasis is great for education because a teacher doesn't have to do classroom management. They can just do pure teaching. The Oasis is good for anti-discrimination. This black woman pretends to be a white man, so her clients take her seriously. It's spoiler-ish, but when the Halliday knew the risk of that his sister may become too big, so created an off switch. But it also shows the negative side that the world's going to pot because everyone is just in there all the time. People are wasting their lives in the game. People's health is getting terrible. Unemployment is above 60%. And the game is full of microtransactions, and everyone knows how I hate those.
Well, to be fair, the world went bad because we had a huge energy crisis. The world is wrecked because of running out of running out of oil and coal and all of the impacts of climate change. Yeah. The world's already stuffed. Yeah. The Oasis is just the last refuge.
But then while everyone's in there, they're not trying to make it better, is the point.
Yeah. And that's actually some of the conflict between some of the characters in the novel as well, is that some people want to use the massive wealth and the power that comes with winning this competition for the purpose of trying to fix some of these problems. And then other characters just see it as a means to escape that world and all the problems that it contains. So, Crystal, how realistic do you find that relationship between the main character and Artemis, who's essentially his love interest that he has a massive crush on online?
The early part of the book feels very young boy crush, but I'm really torn here because there's some things that probably, if you haven't read the book, you need to read the book first before we discuss how the author deals with gender and relationships. I really like that midway through the book, a little bit of a spoiler here, that Artemis does break up with Wade, which is not often the case. Usually the leading male kind of makes the decisions and, the women fall into his lap. But then beyond that, just relationship like boy to girl, whatever, romantic relationship, there's kind of that tension because this is a virtual environment. There's always that tension that they aren't who they say they are. And there's that anonymity of identity. And there's a discussion that happens between Parsifal or Wade, the main male protagonist, and Artemis about who they are in real life. And Parsifal jokes that Artemis could be a 50-year-old obese dude called Chuck, which is humorous, and it brings a lot of funniness to the conversation. But there's always kind of that very tension that, well, actually, no, it could be Chuck, the 50-year-old, who he's crushing on, and that would not please him in the slightest.
Yeah. So, Crystal, from a female perspective, how realistic and how much did you empathize with what the experiences that Artemis had in the story was in relation to Parsifal?
Look, I'm really torn because there are some reveals in the books I'm not going to go into that might conflict my impression of how I expect Artemis to act, especially in the beginning when we're just meeting her, and then kind of getting through the book and getting to know her better, what actually was going on behind the scenes earlier on in the book that might have influenced her decisions and her conversation. It feels real to me, and it's great that at a point she stood up and she broke up with Parsifal. That shows a bit of less of that kind of, oh, I'm a damsel in distress, which is often the kind of trope for females within this kind of geek culture.
Yeah, in terms of people's identity being so vastly different from what they portray online, in my experience, most people have been pretty much exactly what they seem online. I haven't met anyone who claimed to be a 14-year-old girl who turned out to be a 50-year-old guy. In fact, I don't have anything to do with 14-year-old girls on the internet. What are you guys saying?
But then again, how many people have you met online and then followed through to meet in real life?
A fair few.
Yeah, I've met a good
Yeah?
chunk. I've met probably, or I'd say 24, and
Wow.
every single one of them is actually really great. I've had really, really positive experiences with it. And then people always make these jokes about, oh, you're going to like accidentally go and stay with a serial killer or something like that. And it's
that
not...
only happened 3 times.
Yeah. And they all turned out fine. They didn't kill me, totally. And
No, I
Maybe
got them first.
Maybe that's a gender thing, because the risk of me going to meet some random off the internet that I don't know that well is quite risky behaviour.
would you be willing to meet someone who basically said, or that you'd spoken to in this sort of context, so you could hear their voice and the fact that they were female? Would you feel more comfortable in that scenario?
Hearing their voice, maybe, probably, but I would probably feel more comfortable meeting in a group rather than let's meet some
One-on-one.
random guy that's just jumped off the train and is hiding an axe behind his back and is going to drag me off into a corner somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. That's totally fair enough, really. I found the meetings that I'd had with people on the internet were generally really, really positive, and every single one of them had really common interests with me, so we always had stuff to talk about. I've always had really positive experiences. Not that I'm saying you should always go out and meet people that you meet on the internet. You've just got to take it with a grain of salt, I guess.
Especially if there are any underage people listening to this podcast. Do not go to meet people do not meet people in real life. You meet online.
Yes.
Anyone under 18, please seek your parents' permission before going to meet anyone that you meet on the internet.
Yep.
This has been a public service announcement.
Yes.
Actually, you know what? Even if you're over 18 and someone asks, you can say no. Or you can take a friend.
Yep.
Better yet, take a friend.
Or just meet in a public place too. That's also relevant.
Most people I've met on the internet, I've met in groups in public places. So, Blue, I understand you've met most people at events like BlizzCon?
Yeah. So, like, something like that. It's like a
very
convention.
different.
Well, yeah. Some of them was the case. Other ones, I literally had only ever spoken to online. I'm like, hey man, I'm coming to your city. Do you mind if we hang out for a bit? And he's like, oh, come and stay with us. So we just took the punt and went and stayed with them, and it was awesome. Had an absolute ball of a time. So, yeah, it was literally sort of going, I think I roughly remember what this guy looks like, but I know him as blah. And you'll often find yourself using their handle in real conversation and stuff like that too, which can get a bit funny when they have their partners or wives or whatever with them. But yeah.
I gotta ask, Bluetongue, do you still have both your kidneys?
Yes, I still have both my kidneys, and I only nearly got killed by a serial killer once. It was fine. It was fine. Yeah. For our general audience, what kind of things do you think that they would enjoy that are then replicated in this novel?
I reckon if you enjoyed things like The Matrix or Tron, you get a real kick out of this. If you're excited about things like the Oculus Rift and other VR technology coming out, this is the sort of thing you'll really enjoy as well. If you've played any MMOs, you'll definitely relate to a lot of the stuff that's going on in this as well.
If you're a fan of your fantasy or hero's journey, this is a good one.
Ooh, if you're into Second Life, you'll like this one.
Absolutely.
Also, if you're into 80s music and 80s references, this one is totally up your alley. Even if you're not a gamer, the 80s pop culture references are so there.
I think also the whole retro gaming scene would totally appreciate this book. It's got so much in there from that scenario and that world.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here that's really for everyone. I think this appeals to a really wide audience.
Yeah. That said, I feel like it's probably limited to people who already identify themselves as a geek in some way. So, anyone who's probably listening to this podcast. But But
Yeah, if you haven't heard of this book or read it already, you're definitely missing out.
yeah, like it's a really good quality book. It's well written, and I feel like there's a lot to empathize with in the actual novel. And there's also things, it makes you think as well. It makes you think about larger issues like climate change and the like where the world is headed and stuff like that. So yeah, it's got depth to it there as well. That said, I'm not sure a whole lot of sort of literary critics are probably going to appreciate this. People who like enjoy sort of the highbrow of literature might find this a little less appealing.
Actually, some of the literary critics might actually like or be able to rant about some of the character development and how Ernest Cline actually deals with some of the character reveals. So there's kind of some little nuggets of gold in there. Literary critics really like to find something to rant about.
Yeah, there's a reveal in the third act, and I'm going to talk about this in a very, very vague way. But there's a reveal in the third act that very much just feels like it was stapled on at the very end. It's like, oh, I haven't covered these things. Okay, this, and this. Ha! It's a big reveal. Yay! So,
Yeah, it's not really done eloquently is what I'm getting.
Yeah.
I thought it's quite well written, in general.
The book is well written, but the way the character develops in that particular reveal is not dealt with well.
I think that some of our younger audience might not appreciate this novel. So, someone below the age of, say, 18 might not fully appreciate all the stuff that it goes into. It's like someone who's been brought up with like touchscreens and that sort of stuff might find this to be
Too retro.
Yeah, exactly. Too retro. It's way back there, and it's talking about stuff that I just don't appreciate. Like, yeah.
To be fair, I did have a little bit of that. I was born in 1984, so a lot of these references were relevant to me. But even then, when Wade starts talking in first person about this particular piece of stuff, or particular piece of media that I'm not familiar with, and talks about, this song and the studio where it was recorded and the artists and the band's manager and the artist's ex-wife and how that all links together, and it's like 2 or 3 pages of that, I do find myself skipping ahead to the dialogue. So there were a couple of times... Yeah, look, yeah, exactly. It does have the same problem that Seven Eves had, which was, really long rants about science. This has really long rants about really obscure media. And if that's not your thing, look, you'll probably enjoy the rest of the book. So feel free to just skip to the dialogue, which is what, I do.
Yeah.
I listened to this with my wife, actually, and there were times when she was absolutely screaming in the car about how she did not care. So, which was amusing, and did make those parts of the book a lot lighter. So, it's not for everyone, but she did really enjoy the book overall. So, this book, having so many references to so many films and so many songs and so many books, would be an absolute nightmare to turn into a film. But, having said that, Steven Spielberg is slated to direct this, and I understand it's currently under production, but not many reveals have been made about cast yet. And it's due for release in sometime in 2017. So I'm really looking forward to how they handle all the licensing for everything that is referenced in this. Warner Brothers is the studio that's picked it up, so that's really good, because they do own a fair chunk of the media that's referenced in this already.
Yep.
That soundtrack better be amazeballs.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
There's a lot of potential there, isn't there? I'm looking forward to Cyndi Lauper. She's great. Do you think that they're going to be able to do it justice in one movie?
Look, I don't actually feel that movies are the best medium to recreate a book, to be perfectly honest. I don't think the Martian movie really captured everything that the book had to offer. And I don't think a movie about this, even in 2.5 hours, will be able to capture the full feeling of the book. But I'll watch it when it comes out. I would much prefer a TV series, but then again, I've got a lot of time on my hands and I like volume and to have things done really, really well rather than just getting it over and done within a short period of time. But that's just
but
my personal opinion.
you're not going to get the budget you would need to do credit to a world like this in TV.
I'm not sure that's true at all. Game of Thrones. Like, they're costing $2 million an episode.
Wow. So many extras.
Yep. And in terms of, set design and costuming and paying actors serious money, yeah, that's a really high production show. But we're seeing a lot of TV shows head down that path with higher and higher budgets because that's where a lot of the big actors are headed, and that's where a lot of the people are starting to spend more time. There's more money in TV than there is in movies these days.
Actually, with the services like Netflix doing their own content, there's potential there to get that budget down, but still have it be a reasonably good product.
Yeah. Yeah. All hail Netflix.
Oh, and I think through the week, YouTube Red, which is their streaming subscription service, announced some original content. Not sure how well it's going to go, but there's yet a competitor to Netflix, which can only mean better things for TV in general.
Actually, I've already used YouTube Red to pay for some content. I had an opportunity where I was in front of a computer for a long time with not much to do, and I rented a movie on YouTube Red, which was interesting. So it's actually not all that bad.
Excellent.
All right, we're going to move on to one slightly new segment. We've actually got some listener mail.
Hooray!
Yay!
So this is from Tiberius, who we used to play World of Warcraft with, Bluetongue and I, back in the day. It was a very long time ago. So he's got a couple of questions about episode 4, where we discussed BioShock Infinite. So I'll read this out to you guys. BioShock Infinite is one of those rare games for me where I reminisce about the experience and want to play it again, certainly on a harder difficulty. However, everyone speaks so highly about the prequels, which I've never played, that now I'm considering starting again with those. What do you guys think about that plan? Guys, what do you think?
Now, this actually segues neatly into what we were just talking about, and that I found to be a lot of retrospective games, stuff that hits that nostalgia note, to be not nearly as satisfactory if you go back to them from the most recent thing that you've played. So going back to, say, Borderlands 1, for instance, is actually not nearly as satisfactory after you've played Borderlands 2 for a good chunk of time. And what about you, Bauxite? How do you feel about it?
Look, I think BioShock 1 is definitely worth playing. The gameplay itself isn't vastly different from BioShock Infinite, so I'm not sure how much nostalgia creep, I guess, will be in that. BioShock Infinite was definitely good, and the storyline was very, very, well, it was amazing. There's no other word for it. But the storyline in BioShock 1 was equally amazing in a completely different way. I think it would be definitely worthwhile playing BioShock 1. BioShock 2, man, don't waste your time. I'll be perfectly honest.
Ouch.
It was fine. It was fine. But if you really enjoyed the story in Infinite, yes, you'll get an equally good story out of BioShock 1. You're not going to get anything out of BioShock 2. Just play anything else.
Okay.
At all.
So there you have it. BioShock 1 or bust.
Crystal, do you have an opinion on this?
I haven't played BioShock, so not really. But I do agree with some of the points that Bluetongue made about nostalgia and going back. I've attempted to do that with Pokemon a couple of times, and it just hasn't worked. But in terms of movies, slightly different. Going back to the original season of Pokemon to show my partner has been a eye-opening experience.
Yeah, actually, I tried to play Pokemon Black after I'd started playing X and Y recently, and going back just one generation was harsh. Like, there are so many like quality of life things and graphics upgrades that they did in X and Y. But going
the
back,
travel,
yes, absolutely.
the way you travel around is just so much better in the upgraded versions.
Even the jump between X and Y and Omega and Ruby? Sorry, Omega and Omega Sapphire? Whatever. Oris.
Alpha.
Yay.
Anyway.
Let's just say random words. Look, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire.
There we go.
The travel options in that just make the game so much easier. It's so much better. I love that, even compared to X and Y. They just keep getting better and better.
This conversation has just made me realize that I am almost certainly sometime within the next 12 months going to be playing or reading or watching Pokemon, aren't I?
Yay!
You're going to be playing Pokemon the next release. Absolutely. And I will have some legendary Pokemon for you to complete your collection with. I've got them all saved up for you.
Awesome.
I'm going to weigh in on the opposite end of the argument from you guys. Platinum. That was an excellent game, well designed, good Pokemon. I have no trouble going back from X and Y to Platinum, but yeah, but X and Y to Black and White, yeah, it doesn't work. But I think it's got to do with how the game's made and the quality, because you talk about the way to travel in Omega and Alpha is awesome. That's because the map design for the original of Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald is shit. They had to make better. They had to put this stuff in because the map is so bad.
Don't expect any comments from me. I am a Pokenoob.
On the topic of Pokemon, don't be afraid to say go back to Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum. I think they're well-designed games that still hold up.
Wasn't the question about Bioshock?
It was.
It was.
So, in summary, Tiberius, we think that if you really enjoyed Bioshock Infinite, you should go back and play Pokemon Diamond.
Oh,
You're
dear.
welcome.
Good job, team. Good job.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us this week. We hope you've enjoyed yourselves as much as we have. You can catch us on Twitter at wellplayedau. You can send us questions, comments, or abuse at wellplayedau@gmail.com. And if you like us, please leave us a 5-star review. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks.